The Galactic Council had always considered humans soft, too emotional, too attached to things that didn't matter, like honor, like loyalty, like the small creatures that followed them around. Commander Seren stood before the assembled delegates, her boots polished to mirror shine, her uniform crisp despite the 3-month journey from Earth. At her feet, as always, sat Kiro, the Vakrian cub. No, not a cub anymore, though she still called him that, rested on his haunches, golden eyes half closed, seemingly bored by the proceedings. The human brings a pet to the War Council, Ambassador Thexila clicked, his mandibles spreading in what passed for arachnoid amusement. How quaint. Serene didn't react. She'd learned long ago that reactions were what they wanted, proof that humans were too emotional for galactic leadership, too soft for the hard decisions that war demanded. The Kresh Dominion has breached the outer rim, she said simply, pulling up the holographic display. Red markers bloomed across star systems like blood in water. They've already consumed the Paleon colonies. The Terran Protectorate requests authorization to engage. Denied, came the synthesized voice of High Chancellor Vorin. Humanity will defend its own borders. The Council worlds are not your concern. Cairo's ear twitched. Serene noticed, as she always did. But she simply nodded, collected her data slate, and left the chamber. Behind her, none of them noticed the way Kiro's lips had pulled back from his fangs. The Vakrians were an old species, ancient even by galactic standards. They had watched empires rise and fall, had seen the birth and death of countless civilizations. They were apex predators on a world so hostile that most species couldn't survive a single planetary rotation there. They had, for reasons the galaxy never quite understood, chosen humanity. Centuries ago, when humans first stumbled into space with their primitive fusion drives and optimistic hearts, they'd encountered the Vakrians, not as enemies. Vakrians didn't fight unless threatened, but as something else. Something the galaxy didn't have a word for. Humans called them friends. The Council called them pets. Seren's ship, the Indomitable, hung in orbit above Sanctuary Station. She sat in her quarters staring at the tactical display. The Kresh were advancing. 3 more colonies had gone dark in the past week. The door chimed. Enter. Kiro padded in, no longer alone. Behind him came 12 more. Vakrians in the prime of their lives, each standing nearly 2 meters at the shoulder, their fur ranging from midnight black to storm cloud gray. Each wore the modified combat harness that Seren's engineering team had designed. Each had trained with human marines for years. The Council thinks we're soft, Seren said quietly, scratching behind Kiro's ear the way she had when he truly was a cub. They think you're pets. Kiro's rumbling voice filled the room. The Vakrians could speak, though few outsiders ever heard it. Let them think it. The prey never fears until the predator strikes. The Kresh hit the Thanos system with overwhelming force. 60 capital ships, supported by hundreds of fighters and drop pods. The Council fleet scrambled to respond, but they were too slow, too bureaucratic, too confident in their defensive positions. The Kresh didn't care about defensive positions. They cared about biomass, about consuming everything organic and moving to the next system. Ambassador Thexila's frantic transmission reached every Council ship. Where are the humans? Where is their fleet? Defending their own borders, someone responded. As you ordered. But that wasn't quite true. The Indomitable dropped out of hyperspace not at the edge of the system, but at its heart, an impossible navigation jump that only human pilots were crazy enough to attempt. Serene stood on the bridge, calm as ice, as alarms blared across enemy vessels. All units, she transmitted, execute Omega Protocol. The transport bays opened. What emerged wasn't what the Kresh or the Council expected. Hundreds of Vakrians poured into the void, their specially designed combat harnesses propelling them through space with compressed air jets. They moved with a coordination that spoke of pack hunters, of predators who had evolved to bring down prey 50 times their size. They latched onto Kresh vessels like parasites, their molecular claws capable of shredding through starship hulls going to work. Oxygen vented, systems failed, and when the Kresh sent soldiers to repel borders, they found themselves facing creatures that had hunted in pack formation for millions of years. On the bridge of the Kresh flagship, the Dominion Lord stared in horror as something massive and dark appeared in his peripheral vision. Kiro stood there, having torn through 3 decks to reach this point, his golden eyes bright with purpose. You should have listened to the human, Kiro said simply. Before the Dominion Lord's world went dark, the battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the Kresh fleet was scattered wreckage. Not a single council ship had been destroyed. The Vakrians had eliminated the threat with surgical precision, then returned to their transports as if they'd simply been out for a hunt. Ambassador Thexela's ship transmitted a request to dock with the Indomitable. Saran granted it. He found her in the hangar bay surrounded by Vakrians who were being examined by medical teams. Kiro lay at her feet, one of the ship's medics stitching a gash along his shoulder. His tail thumped lazily against the deck. "They're not pets?" Thexela said quietly, his earlier arrogance gone. "No," Saran agreed, her hand resting on Kiro's head. "They never were." "Then what are they?" Serene looked up at the ambassador, and for the first time, he saw why the Vakrians had chosen humanity. It was there in her eyes. The same fierce loyalty, the same protective instinct, the same willingness to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. "Their family," she said simply. The Galactic Council issued a formal apology to the Terran Protectorate the following week. They also issued new regulations about what constituted a pet versus a strategic alliance. But Seren wasn't in the council chambers to hear it. She was on the observation deck of the Indomitable, watching the stars stream by as they headed toward the next crisis. Kiro sat beside her, his massive head resting against her leg. "They'll never truly understand," Kiro rumbled. "No," Seren agreed, scratching behind his ear. "But they don't have to. As long as they remember." "Remember what?" "That the cubs who sat at humanity's feet weren't waiting for scraps." Seren smiled, fierce and proud. They were waiting for the hunt. Behind them, in the shadows of the observation deck, 11 more pairs of golden eyes gleamed in the darkness. Waiting. Watching. Ready.